All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Branch 458 podcast. As promised, we're back here. I've got Eric and Eric on. Say hi, guys.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hello.
So we actually got together like 2 weeks ago, I think, a couple Fridays ago, and we recorded this entire thing. And I went to go edit it and couldn't hear anything. So we're back to report again what we learned at the Region 4 rap session that was September 26th through the 28th, and give you guys an update on what we heard from Renfro while we were there. Um, we're going to just the three of us are here just to kind of we can openly talk about it. I may have written down some notes that either of the Erics didn't have. Maybe they have something that I didn't have. So we're just all going to talk about what Renfro told us about the contract. I know it is, like I said, a couple weeks down the road, but in a perfect scenario, hopefully we release this episode and then tomorrow we have a contract. So I guess we'll just jump into it. I know he told us that there were three big topics left in the negotiation, is what the big snag was. And let's just break down each one of those three individually, and we'll just bounce off what we have written down. So the first big thing that I have is the CCA classification and what they're going to do with CCAs in this upcoming contract. So I have that whether there's still going to be CCAs in the next contract, if there are, how long it's going to take them to become career. On top of that, if there are still CCAs, what's their pay going to be? Things like that. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys. He said that most likely there will be CCAs in the upcoming contract, but their starting wage is going to be several dollars more than what it is now.
That's correct. I believe that's what he said. Trying to find that balance between starting wage and time to career. Obviously, the Postal Service wants to keep it as low as possible and keep the time to career as 2 years. Whereas, although the ultimate goal would be to do away with CCA classification, if we're going to keep it, let's raise their starting pay and shorten the time to career.
Yeah, he had mentioned that what they going through this process, they were trying to spread the benefits to everyone. If you guys remember, he talked a little bit about how that the last two contracts, he said that we had spent a lot of our negotiating capital on the CCAs. For example, like the last contract, a CCA after 2 years, if they haven't made regular, they convert to PTF. That way they get, time towards retirement, better pay, better benefits. And so he gave a few examples like that. And that this time around, they were wanting to give more attention to I guess you could say the rest of us, but, kind of like the top end of the pay scale. And that, yeah, they were trying to balance the time to convert versus starting pay increases for CCAs. I had that written down.
Yeah, I know he said one thing that I think we can all agree on is the CCAs in its current form isn't working anymore. It's and I'm sure both of you know, and how I describe it to CCAs whenever they're coming in, and I get the chance to speak to them in the unit or wherever I'm visiting, is I tell them just hang in there because it's a completely different job whenever you convert to career. It's like a night and day difference. So that's something that he mentioned, is it's not working in its current form. Obviously, we're working towards an all career workforce in that aspect. Moving on, number two was a joint route adjustment process in the next tentative agreement. That's something that I've heard him talk about several times in some of the updates that we have received. And I think it's pretty known that there will not be a joint route adjustment process in the next tentative agreement. However, he did say that just like CD rap and I think it was my rap, those were both born from talks while they were negotiating that tentative agreement. So that is not outside of the realm of possibility that there could be a route adjustment process come from these talks that they've had with the Postal Service during these negotiations.
Yeah, he had talked about that falls underneath the category of work rules. because he said basically whenever you negotiate a contract, you have the economic side, and then pretty much everything else falls under work rules. Some of those work rules he mentioned were about the Article 8 changes, that it looked like they had completely agreed. And I think you'd said the Monday before wrap session that they had finished the equitability form. And what we can anticipate in the next contract is that there'll be 5 overtime lists. You're going to have a no, you're going to have own assignment, you're going to have the ODL, which is the 10 and 12, kind of like what we have now. But then 2 additional options that'll be in there is if you only want to work overtime on your scheduled days, and then you maintain your day off each week. And then the other option would be you just work 8 every day, but you can work your non-scheduled day. So those would be kind of like option 4 and 5. Also under work rules, he had mentioned about the 1260 that it's going to be, I guess, codified in the contract with very specific language saying that carriers will be protected from discipline if you go home after working 12 hours in a day or 60 hours in a week. And kind of what we have now is, let's say your station's shorthanded and they're going to work you more than 12 hours. You can't really refuse it. You can grieve it, and there's things we can do. But we even had a station here in Oklahoma City where during COVID we ran into that, and the current postmaster at the time and the CSOM marched down there, threatened to have people arrested because they were, saying they were going to leave after 60 hours, after 12 hours. And that volunteering will be allowed in that, and that the union didn't want that we just wanted it to be a hard line in the sand, that after 12 hours, you get sent home. But he said, I guess in the spirit of compromise, in order to get this protection for people that do want to, follow the rules and leave after 12 and 60, that if you're like Andy Baker at my station at 39th Street, you can work 80 hours if you want and keep bringing that money in. So he talked about that.
Yeah, kind of the way I understood it is he said that they kind of came to the table and wanted us to agree that people could volunteer if they wanted to go beyond that 12 hours a day and 60 hours a week. And he said, in no way will we agree to that unless carriers have the right to just say no and go home without reprisal. So that's kind of how I understood it. Was they brought it up first and said, this is what we want. And we were like, okay, well, this is what we want.
Yeah, I say to build on but what you guys both said, I think if I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you used the word immunity from discipline if they decide I'm going home at 12 or I'm going home at 60. And then in my notes, from what I remember, I also believe that he said because there is a built-in remedy already of 50% for anything over 12 and over 60, that would still be in there as a pay rate to, two and a half your pay, 2.5 times your pay at anything beyond 12 and anything beyond 60 in a week. So there'd be no more grievances to be filed. It's you work past 12, you're going to get that 50%. It's already built in, just like our overtime and our V time is now, our penalty time is now.
Yeah, that's kind of how I understood it. Is it would be an automatic thing. It's not something we have to file for. It's not something you have to ask for. It's just like when you exceed 8 hours a day, you get that overtime automatically in your paycheck. So that's kind of how I understood it. So right now, I know this is whenever, if and when we get a contract, this may be in there. He mentioned several times that nothing's a deal until there's some signatures on it and we voted on it. So keep that in mind as you're listening to this. We're just relaying information that he told us to get out to our members. But until we do get that language that we do have a right to say no, we do have a right to go home with immunity from discipline. The iron rule is what comes to mind, where we have to follow instructions first and grieve later. It is in the contract that if you go over those 12 and 60, that there's a 50% base hourly rate remedy for those. Currently, that's something we have to grieve. We can't just tell management no. But the exception to that iron rule is unless it could lead to safety for life or limb, or it's going to break the law, or it's something that's what is it, immoral? or unethical, I think is the word it uses. If they instruct you to go back out, I know it's going to be getting dark here in the winter months, and we got holidays coming up, so our volumes go up. And they instruct you to go back out, you're right there on that 12-hour mark, or it's a Friday, you're about to go over that 60-hour mark. You can't just say no. And it's probably not a good idea to say, well, it's unsafe because I'm getting over those hours. You have to identify what the safety concern is. So, I think an example we use a lot is I was walking across 100 Main Street's lawn to deliver the mail, and I tripped over fill in the blank, a garden hose, a stick, a sprinkler head, a lawn ornament. You know, they got the Halloween decorations or the Christmas decorations up, and you tripped over that line because you couldn't see it. That's an identifiable safety hazard, and that's the reason you're not going back out. Which, of course, you should fill out the 1767, write that on there. That's the exception to the iron rule. So I thought I'd just throw that out there.
Let me
Of
mention
course,
something on that. One thing we used to do when I worked at Westside, you know, you're out past dark, and maybe there's one street or two streets in a row where they don't have street lights up. People don't have their porch lights on. And so then you're noticing, hey, I hear a dog barking like, you know, just a little bit ahead in the distance. I don't know if it's out. I don't know if it's put up. So I'm cutting that street off for tonight. And then we'd move up to the next street to attempt delivery on that street. And then sometimes, yeah, we'd be able to knock out, you know, two, three streets amount of delivery. But then maybe the one after that's walking. You start to get out and try to dismount the houses, you know, in order to be safe if you don't feel like you can walk it. And then if you run into a problem, you know, then that does that make sense? Then we would kind of cut that off. So we could still, even in the dark, there's still a lot of scenarios where you can safely deliver the mail. So anyway, for whatever that's worth.
and I'm not suggesting anyone come up with reasons. You should definitely try to deliver the mail, but for us to refuse an instruction from management, you know, you have to keep the iron rule in mind. That's the exception to that rule of obey now, file a grievance later, is if it could lead to safety for life or limb, break the law, or something unethical. So we would have to identify those things, and just saying, well, it's getting dark and I've worked 60 hours already. That unfortunately, even though I agree, it's not a safety concern in the eyes of the iron rule. What else we got? We got
Well, you mentioned there were three things that he had said still kind of remain: the CCA classification, the joint route adjustment, and then the third one that I had down was about the uniforms. That was kind of the third item that they weren't agreeing on yet.
yeah. So the uniform program, obviously we all know that uniform prices continue to go up. Each contract that we get a little bit more and a little bit more for a uniform allotment. And then what happens? The the uniform companies charge us more for our uniforms, and it's this endless cycle. So it's something that we all know the uniform program as it currently is doesn't work. So they're working on possibly having the Postal Service purchase, you know, like some odd million uniforms at one time, so they can get them at a cheaper rate. But then there's the logistics side of it, like where do you store those million uniforms while you ship it out to the members or employees, I guess. And so that's something that he mentioned is not going to be a fix in this current contract, but it's something that they can continue to talk about. Obviously, we will have a increase in our uniform allotment. What that is, we don't know. He didn't give us a dollar amount, but that's the problems with the uniform in its current form, the uniform program.
He said they went back and looked at what the uniform allotment was in the early 70s, like 72, 73, I believe he said, and looked at what a carrier could get with their allotment back then compared to what a carrier can get with their allotment now. And that to get the same amount of uniform pieces, if you will, from 50 years ago, it would have to double what we're currently getting. Obviously, that's not something the Postal Service is probably going to be willing to come to the table with. But as Casey mentioned, you get that we get a contract, we get some price increases, and the various uniform companies also increase their prices. And what we've seen the last couple years here is there's been one uniform company. I'm not going to say the name, but one uniform company has had the gall to purchase a bunch of other uniform vendors and create a monopoly. And because they have that monopoly, they're, pretty much dictating the prices of all the vendors. And I hear carriers all the time, well, I use such and such and I use such and such, and they're not owned by that company. And I'm like, I go and I point out to them, yes, they are, because all they kept the original name from when you were purchasing in the past. It's still owned by that company. The website looks identical to the parent company, although the color scheme may change. But for those out there kind of wanting to know what to look for, look at the contact information for your uniform provider. If you're online, if you're looking at it online, if the mailing address is in, if the mailing address of their corporate office is in Lenexa, Kansas, and that's spelled Lenexa, then it's owned by that parent company that's pretty much created a monopoly on the uniform providers. And then shop around, because there are some out there that are not owned by that monopoly company. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but
So something else that some people may not know, those Citibank cards that we have, that all your uniform allotment gets loaded to on your uniform anniversary date. If you don't use all that money, it doesn't go back to the postal service. Citibank gets to keep it. So I think Citibank might be a little bit upset if and when we do get a different program, like if the postal service does start giving us uniforms, which I think they should. Something that he pointed out there also is, it's our stance, the union stance, that this is part of our job. And if they're requiring us to wear uniforms, then they need to provide us with those uniforms. And every job I've ever had that requires us to wear uniforms, they give us the uniforms. So I hope that's something we see in the future. Not this contract, the next one. So I'm looking forward to that, because it is tedious shopping around trying to find a uniform company that you can get enough uniforms with the allotment that you have.
Yeah, that's like the sweetheart deals of all sweetheart deals. Somebody had to have been related to somebody back in the day when they worked that out between the post office and Citibank.
Right.
280,000 carriers, and anybody that forgets to use every last penny, Citibank just gets to keep it.
Yeah, I'd be
He did
curious what
mention,
that price tag is every year.
oh, yeah, I'd like to know, but he did mention that this one item, um, they may send to arbitration by itself. That I guess they have the option to just send, one small part. So he did talk about that as well. He said that with what it's kind of looking like, that they're gonna maybe work out this new form, or this new way of doing the uniforms, that there's gonna have to be a period for them to test it out. So we'd probably be looking 1 to 2 years before we actually had it implemented. And he said the issue that they got now is, what do they do in the meantime? Whether that's just adding more money on top of our current allotment, or how they sort that out.
So I'm just going back through my notes. I know uh, Eric Robinson, you mentioned the new OTDL, the lists that are coming out, and someone asked there what that equitability is going to look like. Because me, as a steward that I do the equitability in my office, I was thinking the same thing. How are we going to do equitability with two additional lists? And he didn't really go into detail on how we're going to do that, but he did mention that it's a lot easier than you would think. So I'm curious how that's gonna play out. He kind of did mention that if you think of the two new lists, so that we would still have the current list, right? There's a no work assignment and then the big list. You can have a preference of 10 or 12, but there's really just three lists. If you add the two new lists, there's non-scheduled day only, and then working your regularly scheduled day, all the overtime you want. They would fall under the big list. So I guess I'm kind of envisioning it like you're signing up on the big list, but there's like sub lists under that. And if you select to work both of those lists, you're essentially just on the big list. So I'm curious how the tracking is going to work out for that. Hopefully, it's not too much of a nightmare and it is easy, like he said it would be. So something that came out a while ago is floating around the internet. That was, I think, a miscommunication was uh, so our pay, and I got the impression that that is kind of nailed down. Uh, they might still be negotiating just like some little pieces of it, but I got the impression that that part of it was nailed down that last time they had that hotel lock-in, and that's the reason they did that was to finalize what they're going to do with our pay. And so he mentioned a few things that the Postal Service's biggest hangup was top step, and it kind of made sense how he described it. Is as a city carrier, you're going to go from step to step depending on what that time frame is between then. But you should spend the most of or the majority of your career at top step. So that's why for the Postal Service, it had a big price tag attached to it, and he referred to it as legacy cost because you're at that step for a majority of your career. And so once you reach top step, that's where you get, your contract raises, your COLA raises, that there's no step to go to from there. So that was the Postal Service's biggest hangup with the pay and the economic aspect of negotiations.
I did want to mention one thing. He had told us because he spoke for what, guys, about 2.5 hours or so. So he
Yeah,
talked for
around
quite a
there.
bit. Yeah, one thing he had said was he had felt like his words had been misrepresented over the last several months at different times. And this is kind of why we're doing this podcast. He asked everybody to take detailed notes, go back home, and tell your members what he said. And so, this isn't my thoughts of what's going to be in the tentative agreement. This is, directly out of his mouth, and we're conveying our notes of what we read. Yeah, he talked about that historically, our pay has been 80 to 89% of UPS's compensation package. And so that when you go back over the years and you compare what we're making compared to what they're making, it's between 80 and 89%. He said at the end of this tentative agreement that he mentioned, yeah, in the summertime, he felt like they had locked down the last economic piece, that we're going to end up about 89% of UPS's compensation. He didn't tell us a specific dollar amount. The only specific dollar amounts I remember him saying was the bottom, the CCH starting wage was going to be between $3 and $6 an hour or more, but that the top was what was going to bring us up to that 89% mark. He mentioned that there will be significant back pay. He had stated that that was something that the post office knew was going to have to happen. He talked about the steps, that the time to top step is going to be shorter. He mentioned that it would probably look something like just steps at the beginning would be chopped off in conjunction with top step being more than it is now. So that was kind of nice to hear. He did talk about the time to career results in more cost to the UPS, that's why we can't just, roll up in there and immediately, okay, CCAs are all career, they're all making, $26 an hour or whatever. He said that was significant. He had mentioned that if we went to arbitration, that we would probably get the pay increases we want, but that we would not have as much of a say on how it's distributed. And since he had mentioned that was a big part of our negotiations this time around, was kind of spreading it out to all the members, he had stated that's why they've continued to negotiate. In his words, he said Doug Tolino is bargaining in good faith, that this is not as simply as negotiating the price of a car, that every new proposal that we make, UPS, goes back, relooks at their numbers, talks to their people, and then they meet again after that.
If I want to kind of touch on something that Eric Robinson just mentioned before people start, jumping online and the various social media apps. And while the top step pay at the end of this contract might only be about 89% of the top step for UPS, you need to look at the total compensation package, pay and benefits. And that although historically our pay if you only look at that, is that 80 to 89. When you add in the total compensation package, everything that benefits and other, that it is higher than what UPS gets. I understand some people, they only want to see that bottom line, the net pay line on their paycheck. But when you consider the benefits and long-term cost of the Postal Service for us, you realize it's as Renfro said, it's higher than what UPS is getting.
Something else. So the APWU and the Rural Carrier Union, they're going to negotiations. So that was something else that got brought up online was about them fake bargaining. And he mentioned that a little bit. They did start their negotiations with the Postal Service, but just like they usually do, they're going to wait for us to negotiate ours to see how theirs goes. And I think that's just smart bargaining. I think we did that a little bit. We kind of take what other crafts get and we use that whenever we negotiate with the Postal Service. So why wouldn't they do that too? So what they kind of meant by fake bargaining is they're negotiating with the Postal Service, but they're just doing it to go along with the flow of the negotiations, and they're just going to wait to see what we get, how we play out.
Yeah. Two things other that I saw in my notes here. He said that the increases in pay will be significant and that the letter carriers deserve it. And so I'm glad I heard that from him. He had mentioned that if we get the top and bottom raises that we're wanting, the general wage increases would probably stay similar to what they have been in the past, and that there will be significant back pay. And he stressed that. He said that this will be the most significant economic gains ever for us. When you add in the COLAs, the general wage increases, and the top and bottom, increases in pay. Another thing I had under work rules, because I think that was, unless you guys had anything else, I think that was most of the economic piece that he talked about.
Yeah, I
He
think that
talked
was most of
about
it.
annual leave. Okay, he talked about annual leave sellback. Said that that was something that the clerks have had that now we're going to have. So I know some people will be excited about that.
Yeah, the T6 across installations. Eric Beu, you want to talk about that a little bit? I know you've talked about that on the last one that we couldn't hear, so I'll let you go into that one.
Yeah, he mentioned it briefly at rap session. He talked about the T6 across installation. I think he mentioned referred to it as a pilot program. And since I am the steward in a lot of our associate offices, the smaller offices around our branch, the T6 installation or T6 across installations is something that I really kind of latched onto when I first heard about it a few months ago. You have that office that might only have one, two, three, even four routes. Obviously, that's not enough to get a T6 or a carrier technician or a floater or whatever term you guys use in your office. But when you look at, well, maybe, 10, 15, 20 miles down the road, maybe more. I don't know. I don't know what the pilot program looks like. But when you realize that there might be another installation just a little ways down the road, that your office has two routes and they have three, well, then now there'll be a T6 position created that will do two routes at one office, three at this one and four, however it splits up. But for those of us in Oklahoma City, some of us already have that across our offices here in Oklahoma City. You know, for example, I know off the top of my head, War Acres has a floating assignment that does four at War Acres and one at Midwest City. No, one at Hefner. I apologize, one at Hefner. So here in Oklahoma City, we already see that. So Oklahoma City carriers are like, I don't see the big deal. Well, because of the across installations, that will help out some of those smaller offices. The way I look at it is those smaller offices will now have carriers who aren't going to get mandated as easily on their day off when there's someone, a floater or T6, whatever you call it, to come in and carry their route on their day off. Um, I also look at it as think about the number of career positions that can be added to our craft nationwide. Another opportunity for a career conversion. As I mentioned, when I first heard about it and one of the updates that we've gotten on the negotiations over the last few months, I heard about that and I really latched on and I'm like, that's really going to benefit a lot of the smaller offices that don't have enough routes to gain that T6 position.
Yeah, something else that he mentioned was just there's going to be a streamlined process for grievance handling. So I'm curious to see how that's going to work. Apparently it's going to be electronic instead of using the mail service. I'm curious to see how that's going to work, and then along with that, an easier way to do allotments.
I thought Eric was going to touch on it there for a while, the way he was going through his notes. But Renfro did say that the contract, as of right now, tentatively would run through November of 26, and that over the years the contracts have, set to end at various times throughout the year, May, September, November. But he said something along the lines of November was the better one because you get both that year's colas, which, at this point we've missed out on, I think three, if I'm doing my math correctly, as well as, a contract that ends in November. You can negotiate a general wage increase because we normally see those in November, and we don't miss out on one of those as we have with the current negotiations.
Yep, I did have that in my notes and I skipped over it. The biggest thing that I had listed um, was why we haven't went to arbitration. And I know at my station, I've gotten this question quite a bit. I've had this question myself in the past, and he spoke at length on this. What President Renfro had mentioned was that his mindset when they go into negotiations was, how do we achieve the most we can get? How do we get everything that we can for the letter carriers? He had said that at this point where we're at, that scheduling an arbitration date would take away time from their current negotiations and would not provide any additional leverage to us. And I guess that kind of goes hand in hand with him stating that the majority of these things they have already came to agreements on, and that they're just finalizing, the last bits. And he said that he felt like they will be able to finish it without going to arbitration, and that we're going to get a better deal than what we could get from arbitration. And I said something about it before, but I had it written on my second page of notes here that we could probably get similar results dollar-wise in arbitration, but the way it would be split up would not be up to us, and that we believe we would not get the top increase that we want. And so he was saying that they were fully convinced that we could persuade an arbitrator to increase the starting pay, but that we wouldn't get that increase at the top, that we could get an all-career workforce if we wanted, but that the economic impact in the post office for that would be huge. And so once again, it kind of went back to the general theme I heard him conveying of spreading the benefits out this time around. He did say something that I had never heard before that I really liked. He said that when a tentative agreement's reached, just like we have to vote on it on our side, the Board of Governors for the Postal Service has to be in agreement with it. And he said that if he got the feeling that they were not going to be in favor, that President Renfro would speak to each one of them and would basically tell them in a nice way to approve it, or else they might not be reconfirmed. And so I guess that would be, us trying to leverage our sway in Congress, with our, legislative pull that we have. I like that. I came away from it with some really positive feelings. I'm glad he gave a detailed update. And so I know a lot of people have been really kind of wondering about the economic side and about why we haven't went to arbitration. He had mentioned that when the negotiated agreement comes out, we all get a vote on that, yes or no. If we, like it, then we'll vote yes. If as a body, if we don't like it, then it would be voted down. And then it would go to arbitration. And that whatever goes to arbitration, we don't have a vote on. And so just for any carriers that this is your first time around, I wanted you to understand exactly the way that works. So that's pretty much all I had on that, unless I left anything out, guys.
You probably have it there in your notes, and maybe we're going to get to it later, but I'll just go ahead and talk on it because it kind of dovetails into what you were just saying. He talked about the negotiations and how long they've gone on, and a lot of us are frustrated. We all know that, but he mentioned that we could have had a contract, a negotiated tentative agreement, months ago, back towards the beginning of negotiations, but it wouldn't have been what we deserve. That we could have got in there, gotten a quick contract negotiated, and sent to the members. But that, I think he said, the shortest time that they had a contract negotiated, the membership voted down because it wasn't what they felt they deserved. And so that was one of his reasons why it's taken so long, is that he's in there fighting for everything that he feels that letter carriers deserve.
I remember him talking about that, and just from us to everybody listening, whether you're in agreement with the contract or not, whenever we do finally get it and we're able to vote on it, I just encourage everyone to actually vote on it. However your feelings are on it, if you reach out to me, we can talk about it, and but that's a decision that you're going to have to make, and I just hope that everybody votes on it. I think the turnout, do you guys remember the turnout for the last contract? What percentage of our membership voted on it? I know it was very low.
15%.
Yeah, 15%. That's just, I mean, I'd like that to be up closer to at least 50%. I think that's still incredibly low, but it's our chance to have our voice heard. And if you don't like it, then by all means vote no. But if you do like it, then vote yes. I'm just encouraging everyone to vote on it, whatever your feelings are. And I'm not going to tell you which way to vote. Like I said, if you want to talk to me about it, or I'm sure if you call either one of the Erics and talk to them about it, they'll talk to you about it. But I hope everyone listening does vote.
Yeah, let me mention something on that. Most everyone that this is not their first job. So for all of us listening that have worked somewhere else that was non-union, a non-union job, you get very little say in your pay, your working conditions, all these things that affect us. So we have a job now where we get a say in that. But the only way you get to have that say is if you attend your monthly branch meeting. If you, when contract votes come out in the mail, that you open it up and that you do take the time to educate yourself about what's in there and then make an informed decision. When your branch has elections, like right now, there's a position that we may or may not be voting on. Last month, we had nominations for a trustee number 2. Get involved, attend the meeting so you can see who's running. And then if there's an election and you get a ballot in the mail, don't just throw it away. And if you have questions about it, talk to your steward, reach out to one of us. And so since we have this opportunity to have a say in how our job is, we have a ton of people that don't have that say. And I understand, if you're busy, if you have kids and you can't make, the meetings, we have it available on Zoom. You go to the NALC web or the Branch 458 website, and the link and the instructions are there. And so I'd encourage you all to try to start attending some of those either in person or via Zoom. And the more of us that have this interest and that get involved is a good thing. And so for what that's worth, just thought I'd slip that in there.
Yeah, I think that was pretty much it on the contract talks. But just a few other things while we were there at regional road session. We did well. Actually, Eric Beu, I'll just let you talk about it. The charities we raise money for. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes. We had a cookout the first night there in Ardmore, and invited everyone from the Region 4. And for those who don't know, Region 4, there's 15 regions in the NALC. Oklahoma is part of Region 4, which covers Colorado, Wyoming, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Arizona. And every year they have what they call the regional rap session, where rotates through the 5 states. This year was Oklahoma's turn to host, and we had it down in Ardmore. And so members from all 5 of the states that I mentioned came to Ardmore for training put on by the Region 4 NBA staff, as well as a few special guests from national. But that first night we had a cookout, hamburgers and hot dogs, and we asked for a $10 donation from those attending to raise money for MDA. And then of course we also had a 50-50 drawing. And when it was all said and done, between the cookout and the 50-50 drawing, we raised $2,020 for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, which the NALC was the first national or sponsor, if you will, of the MDA. For those of us that are older, we remember the telethon that Jerry Lewis did on TV, and then of course you have the firefighters doing the fill the boot. But even before Jerry Lewis or the firefighters, the NALC was there supporting and raising money for the MDA. And then we did the other charity that the NALC has itself, which is the NALC Disaster Relief Foundation. And I could sit here and talk about all the stories we've heard about our members suffering from the two recent hurricanes that went through the eastern United States. But the NALC Disaster Relief Foundation, it raises money for NALC members affected by disasters, such as hurricanes, or those here in Oklahoma, we know about, we have knowledge about tornadoes. We did football squares, which is kind of like guess what you think the score will be at the end of each quarter of the two Oklahoma universities that were playing, OSU and OU were playing that weekend. And then also we did money for a cornhole tournament and a horseshoe tournament. And between the football squares and the cornhole and horseshoe tournaments, we raised $866 for the national or the NALC Disaster Relief Fund. And then just yesterday, we're recording this the day after our annual chili cook-off and poker tournament. Yesterday at the poker tournament, we raised an additional $235 for MDA. So overall, in the last few weeks, we've raised, if you add that all up, we've raised over $3,000 for MDA and the Disaster Relief Fund.
Who won the chili cook-off?
Officially, Casey Ritchie won the chili cook-off.
Unofficially, Casey Ritchie's father-in-law.
Yeah, I still have to tell him that he won that and had no part in it. But that was really fun yesterday. We all came here to the hall. We usually do it the day before the holiday like this, so that none of us are worried about going to work the next day. We can all relax. So we do it every year. Hopefully next year we got more people that want to come. It was a good turnout yesterday, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I don't even think I talked about work at all while I was here. All right, what else we got?
Well, I was looking through my notes. I think that's most of it. I appreciate the Brant sending me down to rap session. Anytime whenever I go out of town to national or rap session, it's a little exhausting because you're in classes, the majority of the day, speakers that are giving out information that we pass on to the members. So it's a lot of work, but I like doing it. And so thank you for sending me, everybody.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys coming on here again. I know this is the second time, so apologize to everybody out there that it's taken us so long to do this, but thank you, Eric and Eric, for coming on again. It's your day off. It's my day off. We're all doing this for them, so I appreciate it.
No, you're welcome.
All right, fellas. Well, I'll see y'all later.
Bye.